Battlefield Earth, which is a very, very, very large epic version of the epic L. Ron Hubbard novel that was released in the 80s. And we're going to discuss that as well as Galaxy Press's role in publishing in Hollywood, where it's located. Get to know John a little bit better and just find out, what the importance of Galaxy Press is. John, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Doing great, TJ. Thank you very much for having me on.
I greatly appreciate you taking the time out of your, I'm sure, very busy schedule running a publishing company that is dedicated to the work of such an epic author. First and foremost, what exactly is Galaxy Press? What's its goal?
Galaxy Press is a fiction publisher. We handle all the fiction works of L. Ron Hubbard. Of course, he's known as the author of Dianetics and Scientology, which we will address a bit later on in this interview. But before 1950, when he wrote Dianetics, he was one of the most popular writers of fiction in America. He wrote adventure, mystery, suspense, thriller, science fiction, fantasy, and westerns. And because he was such a world traveler, he was at 13, he was America's youngest Eagle Scout. He was a member of the Explorers Club. He was licensed to sail any ocean, any tonnage vessel. It was Master Mariner's license. He was one of the early barnstorming pilots. He was, I think maybe it was in Virginia where there was Sportsman's Pilot, where he was there and he covered various air meets. And he himself was a pilot who they talked about, but he also was one of the journalists who wrote for the magazine. And because of all of his adventures, he was a lieutenant in the Navy, and he was a lot of different things. So he was able to use his explorations as a means of providing, because he's a good writer too, of providing adventure to those who couldn't. He was one of the first people to actually make it to the Orient. So his stories of the Orient were just fascinating. He sold photographs to National Geographic. I guess it was in his first or second visit to China, he went and took a shot of the Great Wall. Up to that point in time, all that America had seen was one or two turns in the Great Wall. So he went, climbed up from a train to a vantage point, took a picture which had, I think, 7 turns of the Great Wall, and that was published in National Geographic. So because of his adventures, he was able to write these incredible stories. And having grown up in Montana at the turn of the century, when what we know as the Old West was taking place, his Western stories also have that reality, which right now in republishing them have mirrored those of Louis L'Amour and Zane Grey in the reviews that we get. So anyway, as one of the writers from the 30s and 40s, he was very well known, very popular. He taught at various writing classes at Harvard, and it was interesting, some of the stories about that. But at Galaxy Press, we republish those stories that have never been published as books. They were published in the magazines at the time, the various pulp fiction magazines. And so in republishing those stories, we have found considerable kindred spirit, not just in America, but in countries around the world, because his stories are high in adventure, but they don't have the sexual profanity, so it makes them appropriate for the Middle East, for Islamic countries. In China, he does really well with his stories there, too. Because his stories in the Orient, at that time, China was the good guys, and Japan was the bad guys in the around World War I. So those have done really well there on his storytelling. So what we do now is we publish these stories, and we do a lot working with middle school, high school, military. This because it's just such good stories. He was in the Marines before he went to the Navy, and he's a top sergeant in the reserves. So he's able to talk Marine stories, and then they sent him with the Navy. So we have found just a lot of interest in his various stories, and even published 60, 70 years after he wrote them, we've gotten so many awards for his westerns, his adventure, his mystery, his science fiction and fantasy, that that's what we work on doing. And we've connected up with a lot of organizations that try to encourage literacy and reading, because these things are age appropriate for middle school. We do a lot nearby with Toys for Tots, which is located there near Quantico. We work very good friend with General Pete Osmond, who runs Toys for Tots. We've done a lot of work with them because the stories are so age appropriate, and a lot of the premise for Mr. Hubbard's stories are the man that learned better. So you've got a guy that starts off not necessarily on the right track. He's doing something that maybe he should or shouldn't be, but he's not really involved with life. And then something happens and he decides he needs to rise to the occasion to overcome whatever obstacles. So whether it's a Western, he'll definitely get beat up once or twice, maybe shot once or twice. But at the end, he comes out and he does the right thing. And that's one thing that General Osmond really liked about the stories, is that it's important for the kids that he reaches with his Toys for Tots program that they know that you can make the right decision. It's never too late to make the right decision and do the right thing. So we've had a lot of fun with these books and taking advantage of that. And that's one thing that republishing them, and we use the original pulp art too. So that makes a lot of fun too, because people just love the pulp art from that era. So anyway, so that's Galaxy Press is about that. We also republished this book called Battlefield Earth, which I know we'll get to that as well. But that was written in 1980 by L. Ron Hubbard in celebration of 50 years as a professional writer. And then right after that, he started a contest called Writers of the Future, which is now in its 33rd year, and has introduced definitely over 750 writers and artists into the world of science fiction and fantasy publishing and illustration. And that's just been, if anybody's a fan of science fiction and fantasy, it's a veritable who's who of the roster of judges that we got for these contests. Anyway, so there's my answer to your first question.
Yeah, and that totally works, and I appreciate that you already invoked the discussion regarding the military, and I recall my time on the ship, us trying to pass the time. There were a lot of science fiction, fantasy, history style fans on the ship, so I could totally see the correlation, and also. Mm-hmm. You stating that Mr. Hubbard, kind of his protagonist was someone who might not have always done the right thing, got beat up a little bit. Could this possibly have been some sort of view of Mr. Hubbard as himself in his writing through fictional characters?
I don't know the answer to that. I can say yes to that, but I do know that because he worked with people and traveled so much, and this later shows in his works like on Dianetics, is that he was a firm believer that man is basically good. And so no matter what situation or plight he's in, and it doesn't matter as much you want to say like this person, deserves to die. It's like underneath all the whatever garbage you see around somebody, underneath that, a man's basically good. And so in his stories, he just shows that under the right circumstances, the right urgency, all of a sudden people will rise to the occasion. And when he was in the military, he has one story where he was captain a sub chaser, an anti-submarine patrol craft in near Portland, Oregon. And I'm looking at a book which has his, where he's on the commission, where he's being commissioned as a captain and doing it. And he had 2 or 3 encounters with German submarines off the coast, and with actual live fighting with the depth charges and the whole thing. And it's since come up that there were submarines that were sunk in that. But, of course, it was very much denied because everybody knows there were no enemy craft within or near the borders of America.
Right.
Couldn't explain necessarily all the sunken ships, but nevertheless, they weren't because of that. And so he had this one thing where he had a bunch of, they were like the dregs. They were guys that, because they needed to fill these ships up because they were producing, but they needed, for World War II, they needed to man the submarines. So he got these guys out of the brig and out of there, and he trained them, and he drilled and drilled and drilled. And these guys, he said, look, when you're with me, as long as you just, do your job and do the stuff, your personal records will stay locked up in the safe, and I have no care to review them at all. And so these guys just came together as a team, and they were, tossing around bombshells. He said to build up their competence, and they just became a crack team there on their sub chaser. And so his whole thing is like, even people that don't take these guys there, this, and he didn't experience that. And at one point when he was in Los Angeles Police Department, he was a police officer. They have a certain type of program where you don't, where you do that. And so he did that he wanted to do it in the roughest area of Los Angeles, which he did. And he had his gun, but he didn't put bullets in. He said, well, the bullets were too heavy. And he just working that district in those bars and handling fights and stuff, he found out that no matter what level of society, people really were trying to survive and were basically good. So his stories communicate that. And so you have the guys that are rough, they're this or that, but then with given the proper circumstance, they will overcome, bad guys who are into still dramatizing, being bad. But anyway, so that's, his stories convey that, and that's one thing, like I said, that the general over the Toys for Tots really appreciates, because some of these guys, they may or not make it into high school. They may or not make it out of high school, so this gives them something that maybe they can relate to these guys. Okay, well, if he can do it, I can do it. That type of a scenario. So that's something that his stories convey, and there's, like I said, there's a lot of kindred spirits that people can relate to these stories. They're not these superhero types. They're just guys that something comes up and they have to deal with it. They come home, and from the Western, they come home and they find that the barn's been, and the homestead has been burned down, and everybody's dead. And so now what's he going to do? He's grieving, but he wants to handle, wants to deal with it. And so what does he do? And so that's the story, that's the premise, and it goes on from there. They're great reads, the various stories, and we sell a lot of books as proof. That's pretty much, how that ties in on that.
Yeah, and this is TJ the DJ here with Galaxy Press president and publisher John Goodwin. Galaxy Press is the publisher of the fictional works of L. Ron Hubbard. Of course, Mr. Hubbard is best known for his work in fiction as science fiction author of the book Battlefield Earth. And we got a great introduction to Mr. Hubbard, to Galaxy Press. However, I also wanted to kind of learn a little bit more about you, John. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? What led you to this position here at Galaxy Press?
Sure. I was involved with publishing actually another publisher called Bridge Publications, which was licensed to sell all of his works, fiction and nonfiction. And this was during the 80s. And this is when you had the Battlefield Earth, Mission Earth, Dianetic books were all on the New York Times bestseller list. And people were confused, like, I don't understand. So what we did is we actually split off and just created a fiction publisher to be able to just deal with this and answer the questions while the Dianetic campaign can continue rolling out. So I was asked in early 2000s to come over and help start Galaxy Press, which I did. And it's just been a lot of fun working on that. I've also gotten very involved with the Hollywood community because we're right here on Hollywood Boulevard, a block west of the Chinese Theater, famous Chinese Theater, and where they have the Dolby Theater, where they've got the Oscars. So I've gotten involved with the community. So I'm on the Hollywood Board of Directors, Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors, and involved with community projects there. We're also on the board to put a park over the Hollywood freeway. There's about a little over a mile stretch in early 1950s. It was dug out as a trench that separated the haves from the have-nots in Hollywood. What we're working on now is a project to put a cap over the freeway, which will give us a 40-acre park. And Hollywood, for all of its storied glories, is the most parked, underprivileged, and most no green anywhere in California. So we're doing this, and that'll be a lot of fun. And then one of my really fun projects that I do is the Hollywood Christmas Parade, and that's coming up. We're in the preliminary meetings right now, the Hollywood Christmas Parade. So I'm the president of that, and we've got just our offices are the green room. We have a couple hundred celebrities in it every Thanksgiving when we do the parade. Olivia Newton-John is this year's Grand Marshal. We work on that, so it's been a lot of fun. And then I've been very active in the audio publishers industry. And I've got this Battlefield Earth audiobook has also been submitted for a Grammy Award. I'm working on that right now. That'll be a definite major achievement to get a Grammy for Battlefield Earth, which has got 67 actors, 47 hours in length, over 150,000 sound effects. It's literally like listening to a movie in your mind. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
And one connection, I think, between something you just mentioned and something I read in preparation for this discussion was you mentioned Mr. Hubbard was a member of the Explorers Club, and you are as well, correct?
Correct, yes. I'm not as storied as he is. He flew 3 flags, and I'm an associate member, but because of his record, and he was actually even had a story in one of the books that Plimpton wrote about Explorers Club. He wrote a story called It Bears Telling about where they say he was wrestling a Kodiak bear on one of his trips up to Alaska. But yes, I've been to several of the annual meetings, and to me it's just important because there's also these men are quite often are larger than life. Some of them are, but the guys that you hear about and know about, they're the guys that are a little bit bigger than life. They're the guys that hit the South Pole, the North Pole, the top of the tallest peaks in deepest points of the ocean, Making on the Moon. Those were all Explorers Club flags that were planted in those various areas as the first. So it's I definitely enjoy being a member and finding out what's happening, even though I myself am not actively with the flag projects, but just being able to support it is great.
Living vicariously through those who
exactly
actually do it.
to those stories. Exactly.
You contribute in the ways in which you contribute, and then hear their amazing stories, which are larger than life.
Exactly.
You know, we briefly touched on, you know, you've mentioned Dianetics a couple of times, and one of the things that I read in preparation for this, kind of from the critics of all of Mr. Hubbard's work, is the fact that the lines can be blurred between Dianetics, the Church of Scientology, as well as just the everyday writings of Mr. Hubbard. And I'd kind of like if you'd be willing for you to kind of just, you know, either put the critics to rest or say, yes, there are some blurred lines here, and this is why. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Sure. So first of all, let me just start off on these critics. It's pretty much a handful, and I'm not suggesting this by any means, but if one were to take a look at the various critical programming that's been done, it's always the same people, you know, and so they've got their agenda, and this is their basically it's their life means that they keep themselves going. They decided they're going to attack the church because they've been able to create some interest in that, and the simple fact is that Dianetics and Scientology are probably growing at a faster rate than any time in history. So with that as its own, you know, preamble on this, Galaxy Press, or actually when Mr. Hubbard passed away in 1986, he had his complete legacy. Most of it was his nonfiction works. He had a small segment of it was his fiction works. So what he did was, in his will, he turned over everything. And it was the same thing like with the Mormon Church, and there's various other organizations that have this as well, where they have everything. Like Deseret News is part of the Mormon Church, but they publish the fiction. You know, they publish all types of fiction, for example. But in Germany, there's the biggest publisher in Germany is owned by the Catholic Church, but they publish all the fiction works. So it's definitely got, you know, prior precedent. What was done was to set up a fiction publisher, which is for profit, and we just handle that stuff. I know some of the things you said is like, you know, the profit, you know, is inured by the church, and evidently people aren't that familiar with publishing. But so trying to cover all the marketing and then expand in the other countries with all the translations, everything that we make as a publisher goes back into the publishing house, and that's pretty much what it's been. Even though the marks are all owned by the church, it's handled by a separate publishing arm, which all the money that gets made goes right back into publishing. There's not been anything that's gone outside of the publishing house. Mr. Hubbard decreed that the Writers of the Future contest be funded out of his monies, and so all the royalties that are paid for his sales, in essence, go to funding the Writers of the Future contest. So because that's a contest which has no entry fee, and all the winners are, and we have winners. We have people entering from over 160 countries around the world, wherever they're from. The judges themselves, who are just literally the who's who of science fiction, fantasy, writing, and illustration, they judge the winners based upon the entrance. And then we fly them out, from Mr. Hubbard flies them out. We put them up in a hotel here. They have a week-long workshop, and all that's funded by Mr. Hubbard. It's there's no gray zone. It's just, you can look it up too, but it's basically owned by, the church since he passed away. But what we have right now is the fiction publishing arm is self-regenerating. So we keep the books, the audio books, the expansion of the countries of the translations. Those are all separate from the church. Not on any of the, they're not affected at all, and they don't affect the church lines. To keep them very, very separate. So there is no gray zone there. Like in his writings, he used, he wrote his various stories. On our Battle for the audiobook, I just got noticed that we're a finalist in another major award that's happening too. So it's the best spoken word album with the quality of his work and the fact that we have the actors themselves to say we love doing his work. And we have, we're right here in Hollywood, so with Battle First, we have 67 actors. Another audiobook coming after this has upwards of 200 actors in it. And doing these projects became a project that people really wanted to participate because his dialogue is so authentic no matter what type of person, because some people specialize in this type of person. Well, he was able, because of experiences, write those personalities into the different characters. Because when we do our audiobooks, one of the things that we do is very much different than what other audiobooks have done, is we actually get the people that are most closely associated with that personality. So if it's an Oriental part, then we get an Oriental. If it's a Scotsman, we get a Scotsman. We get whatever's needed, so we get that very authentic sound that goes with on the audiobook. What we have found, because of the authentic sound effects, the authentic personalities that are speaking, people are able to much more easily filling in their own pictures of what the girl looks like, what the guy looks like, how the scenes look rolling out, because of the quality of the audio production. So the actors very much enjoy doing his dialogue because it's so realistic. They don't feel compelled to have to change what they're saying, because what he says is that's how the guy would talk. So it's his fiction works are just pretty much second to none. Not from me saying it, but from reviews and the articles. If someone wants to to look it up, Galaxy Press and Battlefield Earth and Facebook pages, they all list. I'm the one that handle all the social media, and so I try to keep up to date with all the different comments and reviews. There's just rave reviews, Amazon, Goodreads. You'll just find a lot of really, really good reviews about his stories.
Right, and you keep discussing the audiobook here, and I watched the trailer for the audiobook, and it seemed like an amazing production, and another project, I guess, if you will, of Galaxy Press has been the golden age of radio theater. Can we talk about that some?
Sure, absolutely. That's been a fun project, and I've only recently started with this new invention called Facebook Live in the last month or so. I've been broadcasting it also live on Facebook the last three shows that we've had. And the theater, we take these Pulp Fiction stories. Just the last show we just did was a fantasy that took place like in the early 30s. It's called The Crossroads. It's it takes place in the Midwest, takes off on this funny notion that farmers, you hear about all this widespread, hunger going on, but the farmers are still paid to plow up their fields and not produce crops. In America, it's still happening right now. So it's the whole story based on that, but that was obviously written in the 30s. It's like this, what a bizarre notion, this farmer, and then he ends up going to this crossroads, and it turns out to be a crossroads to various dimensions and other people, and so he's able to make satire on the various types of economies that exist that are just in the frailty of each one of those. So we had like Nancy Cartwright, who's the voice of Bart Simpson. We had another gentleman who's the voice of Piglet in Winnie the Pooh. And so we'll get the various actors who will play these parts, and we'll have right here on Hollywood Boulevard, we'll have like 100, to 150 people will be in the studio, in the theater rather. We're broadcasting as well. So on this last performance we did, had about 123,000 people. It was interesting that watched it. It was interesting. About 20% of the people, when I checked the statistics afterwards, about 20% of the people were from England, and theater's really big in England. And about another 10% of that was in Ontario, Canada. And then I spoke with my wife, who's from Toronto. She said, "Yeah, theater's really big in Toronto." So it is something that really appeals to theater goers. So we're just working on that to build it up. But it's another way of keeping that form of entertainment alive. Realize in the 30s and 40s that was America's favorite form of entertainment, radio theater. That's where before movies people would go and to the radio and they turn it on. They listen to the Lone Ranger or the Shadow, these various programs. So that's that same type of a concept, except now we have the sound dimensions of the 21st century that we can apply to it. So it really takes it to a whole new level. So we do these 2 Saturdays a month, and now we're broadcasting them internationally, which is really good. And we have a Facebook page on that too, which is the L. Ron Hubbard Theater.
Okay, so just go to Facebook and search for the L. Ron Hubbard Theater then?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's probably the easiest way to tell people is throwing a lot of W's out there and stuff like that. This is TJ the DJ on Topical Applications, WODU, the heartbeat of Old Dominion University, hanging out, talking over the phone with Mr. John Goodwin, the president and publisher of Galaxy Press, which is dedicated to preserving and disseminating the fictional works of L. Ron Hubbard. We just discussed the golden age of radio theater, which is featured in the L. Ron Hubbard Theater, and that's on Hollywood Boulevard, correct?
That's correct, right here, about a block west of the Chinese Theater on Hollywood Boulevard.
It sounds like you are preserving this golden age of radio. And where did that name come from? Because it sounds very similar to an age of science fiction writing that's referred to when you refer to people like Asimov or Mr. Hubbard himself.
Well, what we did was we took it to the community. We did surveys, and a golden age is, by definition, you get the science fiction's golden age, which was named after the fact. And Mr. Hubbard says because he was one of the first people brought in by the publishing. I'll take this digress momentarily to give you a bit of a history lesson on the start of the golden age of science fiction. The publisher of Street and Smith, located in New York, had a magazine, Astounding Science Fiction, and it wasn't really doing very well because the stories they were publishing were the science fiction with ray guns and robots, and they weren't very people-centric. And so it wasn't doing very good as a genre. The adventure was the top. That was the top seller of that. And so L. Ron Hubbard was one of the top names in adventure writing, in the various magazines there. And so he and a few others were brought in by Street and Smith and said, okay, look, we want you to write science fiction. And as Mr. Hubbard tells it, when they say do this, you salute, very erect and say, yes, sir, so because they're the ones that controlled everything. So he brought in this editor by the name of John W. Campbell, and he was directed basically, whatever these gentlemen send you, you publish. And so that was the start of, that was the late 30s. And so the first story that Mr. Hubbard submitted was called The Dangerous Dimension, which was an equation that, mentally that you could then have that would, he's talked about Spinoza and that your mind over matter, and he ends up working out this equation that sends you to different places if you think of it. And it's a whole story about that. And so, but that was the first story he published into Astounding Science Fiction, and it pretty much started changing the direction of Astounding Science Fiction to where the stories became more and more people-centric. You still had your spaceships and whatnot and ray guns, but people played a much bigger role in it. And like you said, it's only after the fact that it was referred to as the golden age of science fiction. At that time, it was just a lot of creativity happening, and it was a burgeoning scene with this type of a storyline. So with him writing in that, he was able to get the start of this new thing called the Golden Age, because that's the beginning of that stuff. So Golden Age was surveyed out as a name for something that was very clean, very prosperous. It was the greatest amount of expansion, greatest amount of creativity. So these stories come from that time period. We call it the Golden Age theater. Stories from the Golden Age, because it was that type of storytelling. There was so much more innocence in America at that time. Now, the stories there, the big love scene at the end of it, is they looked at each other and knew it was right. There you go. You can fill in your blanks, or, he gave her a kiss, and that was the big love scene. So some people have this idea you need to get really graphic to be able to say, okay, here's the love scene, and get very into the thing of it, where it's not needed. And what's funny is that even at military bases with our stories, where there's a concept that you need to have the grit. It's not in these stories, and these stories still sell really, really well. So that's where the idea of the Golden Age came from, is from surveying the consumers, and because that really represents that innocence, that extreme sense of creativity, the rawness of something brand new that takes it to a whole new level and a whole new height.
Right, and it's interesting to note that in a time where, and especially on the theme of this discussion today here on Topical Applications, that, we're talking about returning to an age, that's almost 100 years ago, whereas the actual topic of the conversation that we're here today for is science fiction, where we're looking to go into innovation. And I greatly appreciate the convergence of the two with what y'all are doing there.
Good, yeah. It's after World War after World War II, here's another little backstory. Right after World War II, and Mr. Hubbard lost a lot of his friends during a time period. Before the show, we talked a bit about it was a rough period because he obviously stopped writing during that time period because he was, in a war. And
I believe in his interviews in the 21st century version of Battlefield Earth, he said even writing letters home was tough.
Yeah. So he was with some friends, like one of his good friends at the time, Robert Heinlein. Korea started to escalate right after World War II was over, and then it was rapidly approaching a world war scene at that point, and then the Cold War started building, and it was just like war was definitely what was in sufficient numbers of people's minds that it was still a big part of the economic machine of the planet. And so he and Heinlein and a few others met in Heinlein's home in Los Angeles, and they conceived a space race. And they thought, okay, we're going to start writing stories about going to the moon, going to Mars, going to Alpha Centauri, taking men's attention from fighting each other and instead fighting the unknown of space. And so you start seeing a bunch of stories going out like that. And because they themselves were celebrated officers of World War II and the top-ranked science fiction writers, they had the ears of people in Washington. And so you had what started at the time was a playing down of the arms race and a building up of the space race, which obviously at the get-go, Russia had the first win with that, with Sputnik going up in 1957, but then it kept going on, and then in 1969, obviously, it seemed to culminate with the man landing on the moon. But that was the use of science fiction, which Mr. Hubbard refers to as the herald of possibility. And that's really important. That's, I think, in part why he created the Writers of the Future contest, was to keep that alive. Because if you keep the guys constantly postulating that future, not the dystopian future, not the future where all finally ends up and we're just, totally, there is no good future for us like the Mary Shelley Frankenstein, but instead, whatever we run into, whatever like obstacles, and ultimately the human spirit survives and we overcome it, and that's what this Battlefield Earth is about. But that's what the stories they were trying to show, like, we can overcome, and there you have not the Elon Musks of the world today. And at our awards ceremonies every year for the Rise of the Future event, we have the engineers and the creators, astronauts of this man going to space, as predominantly the speakers we have, talking about what science fiction did for them to inspire them to become an astronaut, to become an engineer, to design this what's on Mars right now, or to go to here or there. Even I spoke with Elon Musk at the premiere of Star Wars in December. We had the premiere in front of our building, so we went in there and I chatted with him. And he said that he'd read Battlefield Earth when he was 13. He said it was a great story, So I've not found somebody who's themselves very accomplished in the space, this whole type of evolution, who wasn't inspired by science fiction in their youth.
I know a common theme in all of the additional materials to the new release of Battlefield Earth, which you can find from Galaxy Press as well as at your local major bookseller, is the fact that in the time of Mr. Hubbard's writing, the science fiction writers were the scientists, and the scientists were the science fiction writers as well, correct?
That's absolutely correct. You take a look at some of the guys that he worked with. In fact, we have the Rise of Future contest, and some of our judges that we have for the contest. We have a guy named Yoji Kondo. He ran the SETI program for the United States for several years. SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. We have a guy named Doug Beeson. He was the director at Los Alamos of the International Security for the United States. He ran that part of Los Alamos. We have Jerry Purnell, who was on the governor's board for space. So we've got several of our judges who themselves have been day jobs, rocket scientists involved with this, and then their night hobbies has been writing the science fiction books. And it's there's very much still that crossover that occurs.
And I know this conversation is mainly about the works of Mr. Hubbard, in particular Battlefield Earth with the new release and all. However, I do have a question for you personally. Have you ever tried your hand at penning science fiction?
Well, sometimes in my original press release I used to write, I used to get accused of all types of things, but then I finally learned what I was doing, and then it went better. But no, no, I do the publicity. I write, blogs, posts, and stuff like that. But I haven't ventured into that, and I don't know that I will at this juncture of my life. But it's something that I would have enjoyed, but right now I'm so busy with the various projects that I enjoy doing right now that I said this past weekend we had 25 Santa Clauses here at Santa School. So those types of things that I'm able to work with and help with are just, I find those incredibly gratifying. And again, we'll just do a little digression here too. I never knew the history of Santa Claus and just how important it is, just because everybody kind of perhaps takes it for granted. But a little kid, when he comes to Santa Claus to ask his wish, Santa Claus will do anything. So what do you do when they say, "Can you bring my brother back from Iraq?" Or "I want my mommy and daddy back together again"? Or those are some like, whoa, how do you deal with that? Or the little kid comes up and pulls your beard. You want to slap him. How do you take the pictures? And also, there's a problem too with some of the big corporations when they get Santa Clauses. They anybody can go buy a costume at the local costume store and say, "I'm Santa Claus," and they can go in and they can rip the place off blind at the private parties. So he teaches this school, and when it gets certified, then those are the guys that get hired by the big international corporations for their big Christmas parties, or even whatever companies, because these are trusted Santa Claus, and these are the ones that have the real beards and the real white hair. Okay, it's the real deal.
I think I just saw a story recently on CBS Sunday Morning about them not too long ago.
Yeah, exactly, you did. Yeah, that's Santa's him.
Yeah, and it was covering exactly what you're saying there, and like you're saying, while you might not be a science fiction writer, you are still a writer in the term of a writer, and I can appreciate that, being a public relations major, in communications and all. And I think Mr. Hubbard even said that I'm a writer. It doesn't matter what genre I write. I'm a writer, and writers are writers.
That's right. He said a writer writes.
Yep.
And that's just something. If I want to be remembered as anything, I want to be remembered as, I'm a writer who loved to write.
So now we're getting to kind of the culmination of Mr. Hubbard's work in this point of the interview. Here, John Goodwin of Galaxy Press, TJ the DJ on Topical Applications, WODU, the heartbeat of Old Dominion University. And we've kind of, I greatly appreciate how you have digressed into history, and we've talked about multiple genres. However, the meat of this story here today is the 50-year anniversary of Mr. Hubbard's works. and Battlefield Earth, which came out in the 1980s. So why don't you give a little background as to why y'all decided to re-release such an epic version of an epic science fiction novel?
Well, it was we just completed republishing all of his stories, his novelettes, short stories. In the Stories from the Golden Age, that was 153 stories and 80 books that we published there. And we attend a lot of events, a lot of consumer fairs, Comic Cons, stuff like that. And it just continues to be one of the best-selling books, Battlefield Earth. And you'd have these guys coming up, oh, I've read that 10 times, I read that 20 times, I've got 4 copies of that book. And it was so much that we were getting at that, well, maybe we should just republish this. So at the time when it was published in the early 80s, a very famous artist by the name of Frank Frazetta had been commissioned to paint a cover. And the cover, because the working title of the book was called Man, the Endangered Species. And so he painted a painting which was a typical Frazetta. So the girl was very scantily clad and was not appropriate for a book cover at that time. So we did more surveys on it newly. And so that was a cover that was really liked because he's, like I said, he's such a famous artist. And so we put that cover on it. We added, at the time of writing the book, Mr. Hubbard had several hand notes he was doing as he was writing the book. And the book, 425,000 words, he wrote that in 8 months. And it was a multiple, bestseller. It was on the list combined for over a year, 8 weeks on the New York Times alone. And so there were several handwritten notes. So in the back of the book, we put like 11 different handwritten notes on different aspects of the story. And then he did an interview at that time. It was his last public interview with Rocky Mountain News, which is no longer existing as a publication, but he did it there because the story starts and takes, the principal place there is near Denver, near the Air Force Base, actually. And so it's with that, we had all these elements coming together. So okay, so let's go for republishing it. So we put the whole thing together as a new release. We recorded because what we've done with the Stories from the Golden Age, which is multicast radio theater style, we hired 67 actors and put together that audiobook. And the final mixer is the person that mixed several of the Star Trek movies. So his thing was, wants you to listen to a movie in your mind. And so the talent we put together was just, we have a pretty good choice selection here in Hollywood of using audio talent. So we had a lot of people that worked for Disney, and so they did the audiobook. So when we came with the release earlier this summer, we closed down Hollywood Boulevard. We crashed an alien spaceship in the middle of Hollywood Boulevard, and we had the big alien Pearl who came out of it, and we had Johnny, the hero, and Chrissy, the heroine, and a bunch of Scotsmen and the bagpiper all there capture him. And so it was covered by all the news channels, ABC, CBS, Fox, ABC, and then it went national, and it was a really good start to the release. We hit #1 in the United States for trade paperback books, science fiction, and audiobook a few weeks later, and it was it continues to sell really, really well. In fact, right now on Amazon, if you're into Kindle, and Amazon has it on special for the month of October that they put on themselves for 99 cents to get the book. It's just like an amazing deal. It's something that they're promoting. So
well, and even the paperback version is a pretty good deal price as
well. Oh, it's an amazing deal right now. You have the paperback, the audiobook. If you like the audiobook, it's if you're we're in all the different Barnes & Noble stores. We're featured in Barnes & Noble throughout the end of the year. Or if you go to Books A Million, featured there throughout the end of the year. So it's been one of those books that does really, really well. I was just a few weeks ago in Atlanta at DragonCon. The book just sells really well. So it was totally a correct move to re-release it. And again, it's one of those things there where we have some people coming up, and if you go to the Facebook page, Battlefield Earth, I put a lot of videos, a lot of fan interviews, and I read this thing 20 times. I've read this 10 times. This is my favorite book. And we got, when we were at the at the booth, if people come up and they look at the book, and someone else will just walk up out of nowhere and say, "That's a great book. You should read it." It's so loved by fans that it was absolutely correct, decision. And like I said, it still sells really good right now. It's in the top couple hundred on with Amazon as a book, which is just we're going to keep on rolling it out. It's so well liked. So that was the reason why we did it, and it was absolutely correct. And we're right now in the process of working on a comic series, graphic novel. They'll start releasing next fall, and it just continues to grow. In fact, somebody saw our spaceship on the news. It's a convention coming up in a few weeks in Silicon Valley in Northern California called Alien Con, and the main thing the main sponsor on that one there is Ancient Aliens TV show, and they saw it, so they want us to bring up our spaceship. They said, "Good, we'll give you whatever. You bring the spaceship up there," So it was, and then I just want to hold out. There's another convention happening in Los Angeles saying, "Well, we want the spaceship, so how can we do that?" So it's just that's what it's just been very, very good.
That's great, and y'all also released the audiobook. I know you've touched on it briefly, and we're probably going to have a whole nother show devoted to talking about the audiobook, I'm hoping. And can you just kind of briefly go over that? Like, who are some of the people that were cast? Because the voice work in it is top. It's A-list voice work.
Yeah, so we've got actors like Scott Menville. He's I think plays Robin in Teen Titan. We've got Corey Burton. You not necessarily would know him, but you'll recognize his voice. He does a lot of Disney work. Fred Tatasciore plays the Hulk in all the different Hulk cartoons. But we've got Phil Proctor was the drunken monkey in Dr. Dolittle. He's also one of the co-creators of the Firesign Theater, if you're familiar with that. Jim Messman is the director, but he's also very well known. I guess in Virginia, you may or may not be politically inclined, but in the Jib Jab thing, This Land, that was done back with George W. Bush and Kerry.
I do remember that.
He's the one that did that, and he just did another one on this election between Trump and Clinton. He just put it out a couple of days ago. But he's done a lot of games and movies too. So, but it goes on and on and on with the actors, 67 actors, and we've had a lot of reviews saying this has ruined other audiobooks for us, because it really is like listening to a movie in your mind. If you have the exact sound effect for the description of that, for the story, then they'll give you the picture. It's one of those things that's just, a gun isn't a gun. A 22 rifle is different than a 30-06 rifle, is different than a shotgun, is different than a Sharps rifle, is different than, having just that one sound. It is like a gun fired. But if you pull out whatever is named in the story and shoots it, then you know what he's shooting because of the sound that it makes, if you're familiar with guns. And one thing that was done too, the aliens in the story Battlefield Earth, because they're aliens, it was made more metallic sounding, and then all the human sounds and sounds we're used to are the natural sounds. They can delineate between what they are, so it's easier for you to conceive at least an alien or alien equipment versus man-made stuff. So,
and I want to kind of digress here too, because upon the initial release of Battlefield Earth, Mr. Hubbard also released a soundtrack to the book. However, it was kind of opposite of how y'all did it for this modern release, where you actually went back to that golden age of radio sound effects and I saw in the trailer where they're using stuff that I've read about in my communication classes, and studying ancient forms of radio, basically, and how you just, you break a window with a hammer, or you use a spring for a ray gun, But Mr. Hubbard's ideas were to make it more futuristic sounding. What kind of delineated the processes between the soundtrack originally and the audiobook today?
Well, we had, I mean, there's been so many advancements in technology. Back then, the Foley, which is what you're referring to, where you have those little, the little box that had the sand in it, and that whole thing, that type of creating stuff. And at that time too, I think it was called the Fairlight, one of the first synthesizers of making music. It was, I mean, at that time you listen to it and you're like, wow. Like, it was revolutionary when he came out with Space Jazz. First of all, there'd never been a soundtrack to a book before, and then to use this stuff. And he had, at that point, Nicky Hopkins, who used to play piano for Rolling Stones and for a lot of the major names. Chick Corea, who's multiple, he's won like 22 Grammys now. He was creating that stuff. That was the very first synthesized music that existed, that they were creating sounds with and creating these special effects with that were futuristic. We're now, you come forward 35 years, there's been a lot of new technology that we've been able to embrace, and that's what was done. But at that point, his vision of it now has grown. It's kind of like, this is like, of course you do that. Well, not then when he wrote that, when he scripted that and wrote the music to Space Jazz. It was brand new. It was cutting edge technology then. And now that cutting edge has moved forward, that 35 years, and that's what you have now.
Right. And then the fact that, like you said, y'all used the cutting edge, more digital sounds for the space type sounds, and then I would say analog style sound effects for the human sounds, which and even just talking about it here as a student of communication practices, I can kind of hear the distinction in my own mind when we discuss it, and especially with your enthusiasm for the process. So I appreciate you painting that picture for us as well. And where can people go to get a copy of the audiobook?
Yeah, the audiobook is, first of all, if you've got the Barnes & Noble or Books A Million, it's in all the different stores. And I know you've got plenty of them there in Virginia. Mm-hmm. And then, two, on Amazon.com. That's a common place you will go. But anywhere you can get books or audiobooks, you'll be able to find, or actually I say find books and audiobooks. You can get them in those stores. And then you can also, like I said, Amazon, or if you have any stores that you subscribe to with downloads, you can get them from there too. But it's if you enjoy audiobooks or planning trips, if you drive a lot, we have truckers just went ape over this. They just absolutely ate it up. We attended Midwest Truck Show not so long ago, and it was such a hit. Getting these things because they liked the long format audiobooks, and then they started listening to these things here. And again, you had other truckers coming up to other truckers saying, "Oh man, this is amazing," because we tested the audiobook with a few truckers outset, and it became such a. Again, they helped sell it to other guys that weren't familiar with the product. So if you enjoy listening to stories, it's a whole new level that we've created with this on the 67 actors and all the music soundtracks that we create, because we created original music for this too, and we have obviously the 150,000 sound effects, which really create those exact sounds for the exact description.
And this is TJ the DJ, Topical Applications on WODU, the heartbeat of Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia. And we're talking with John Goodwin of Galaxy Press, which is dedicated to releasing the fictional works of L. Ron Hubbard, known for, in his fiction genres, his biggest work was known most recently as Battlefield Earth, and that's what we're discussing today. Right here, right now, we have been discussing the audiobook, which was a humongous production. Great piece of work. If you're into that sort of thing, I would definitely suggest checking it out, looking into it further. Of course, you can go find more information at galaxypress.com. And kind of wrapping up, I kind of want to, kind of discuss a little bit of the theme of, Battlefield Earth, and we kind of hit on it all throughout when talking about all of Mr. Hubbard's works. It's just kind of that theme that humans are good and perseverance is a trait that allows humans to continue to thrive in light of any type of antagonist that comes at us. And could you elaborate a little bit more on that theme? I don't want to say too much myself because I'm scared I'll give the entire plot away.
Yeah. He was asked about the about science fiction, and I just want to read a little bit of this from the interview he did with Rocky Mountain News. He says, science fiction is waxed between technology and people. Stories have been either about the latest gimmick or about people. In 1938, I was asked by the top brass at Street & Smith Publishing to write science fiction stories for the new magazine, Astounding Science Fiction. In those days, a request from Street & Smith was not to be taken lightly. Nevertheless, I complained that I wrote about people, not machines, which was the vogue. They said that was just what they wanted, and to go ahead, I did. Until then, SF was virtually nothing but hyperspace drives and time machines and various mechanical gimmicks. The human element was secondary. For me, the human element and human potential was always primary. People are simply more fun than machines. Look at the biggest box office smash in history, E.T. It is about people, and I include E.T. in that category. The technology is not only secondary, but a threat. The looming technology that comes in to capture E.T. I think that is perhaps the greatest shift in science fiction. In Battlefield Earth, there is an advanced technology, but it is the technology of the aliens who have conquered Earth and virtually wiped out humanity. Pitted against this is the human spirit. I don't think I would be giving anything away to say that the human spirit prevails. So that's kind of his theme, his overriding theme throughout this book. And it's just a total rollicking ride, like Star Wars, Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T. all rolled into one type of a story. But it's the human spirit that prevails, which is what you really get in the end.
Kind of wrapping up, I want to talk about the future of Battlefield Earth and Galaxy Press. I know that the movie that came out previously was not received as well as y'all probably would have liked. However...
Well, I got to tell you something. And it's funny because these days, because I'm out in the field a lot at various events, and the climate's changing. You have a few people that just want to diss it just because they like dissing your basic troll personality, and you have a few people that want to be able to use this as an opportunity to naysay Scientology because they try to make some type of connection that way. But in actual fact, more and more people are saying, "Well, I actually like the movie," So the problem that it had with it though was that it wasn't true to the book. It wasn't true to the story. And so anybody that's familiar with the story just immediately rejected the movie because it wasn't true to the book. So I like the movie because I sold 500,000 books. So I'll leave it with that. It was like, it doesn't get into whether it was a good or bad movie. We sold a lot of books. It gave a lot of awareness of that story. And we continue to sell a lot of the books. At some point, we may be revisiting the movie. Like I said, our next step on Battlefield Earth is the comic, which we'll be announcing that probably at Comic-Con next year in San Diego Comic-Con, and then release it, the first one at Dragon Con in Atlanta in fall. And it'll have one comic a month for 21 months. And a very popular illustrator by the name of Mike Perkins is doing the illustration on it. He does a lot of the Marvel stuff. So it's about halfway done right now, and we're looking forward to that. So after every comic, so we'll have a graphic novel. Then when all 21 are done, then we'll put a special edition out of the full graphic novel. So that's like the next step on that. And like I said, the movie, sure, it'd be great if we get something going on that. But right now, we've got our line going, just building the enthusiasm for Battlefield Earth. And then one thing that's going to be coming up next year, too, is Mission Earth. We're re-releasing that one. That's a 10-volume series that he wrote that was also New York Times bestsellers. And that is the audiobook there is 123 hours long between all 10 of the books. So that's what's in the works come next summer. We're launching that one.
Cool. And also coming up in the future, I also need to give you this shameless plug here for Writers of the Future, Volume 33. When is that ceremony going on?
It goes on April 2nd at the Wilshire Ebell Theater here in Hollywood. if you're going to be here in the LA area, it's open to anybody who's a fan. It's literally a who's who of science fiction writers, because they're most of our judges who will be here, and obviously the winners. We will be broadcasting as well on Facebook Live, but it's an amazing event. There'll be about 1,100 people in attendance. It's a pretty big deal. But if you're anywhere going to be around in this area at the beginning of April, please do. That's on writersofthefuture.com, and you can check that out and find out how to RSVP for that event. But it's an amazing deal, and it's guaranteed to be better than last year, which was better than the year before.
Right. And that's the 33rd year of it, correct?
Correct. This is volume 33.
All right, yeah, and so BattlefieldEarth.com is the website for the book and audiobook and all things Battlefield Earth. You said WritersOfTheFuture.com is the website for more information on writers. And is it still Writers and Illustrators of the Future, or is it only?
It is.
Okay.
Well, it's right. There's two sides, Writers of the Future and Illustrators of the Future, but it all goes to the same page when you go on the other day. But it's the two contests, Writers of the Future and Illustrators of the Future.
All right. Well, John, I want to thank you for taking this hour out to hang out with Topical Applications. And is there anything you'd like to sum up this conversation with today?
It's been great talking with you. And but the main thing is, like, our books, they really are good stories, and so they're family-friendly stories. So if you got an audience that has a family and wants something that's appropriate for their middle school kids, this is good for that. Like I said, Elon Musk read Battlefield Earth when he was 13. And a lot of people read it when they were young, but a lot of people are reading it when they're 50, so they're really appropriate for fans of all ages. And if they, I enjoy what I'm doing, and the reason why we work so heavily on this republishing line is because we work a lot with literacy programs, projects to get people reading, because that's very, very important. And one of the best ways to get people to read is to give them material that they enjoy reading. It's different than the stuff that you have to read. So when people can start reading something like, oh, this is fun, it encourages them to want to read more. And so that's one thing we found very successful with this whole project we've been working on. So anyway, it's been great speaking with you. And that's, pretty much that's the L. Ron Hubbard was a great writer. And it's, I work with a lot of other publishers. We work with a lot of helping other programs, to support other writers as well. All of our winners of the contest were great writers. So it's something that, literacy is an integral part of survival and success in life. And so anything we do to help contribute to that, we like to do, because it's just going to help in general.
All right. Well, John Goodwin of Galaxy Press, galaxypress.com, BattlefieldEarth.com, WritersOfTheFuture.com. A lot of .coms for you. And, however, there's a lot of information to be shared on Mr. Hubbard, even though we remember him for his philosophies, as well as Battlefield Earth, that he wrote, pulp novels, contributed to pulp novels, I guess I should say. And, well, he probably wrote enough to write his own, but as well as, Westerns and lots of other content on aircraft and flying. And so I, again, thank you for taking the time out of your day to have this conversation here on Topical Applications. And we'll carry on this conversation at a future date. Thanks a lot, John.
Thank you very much, TJ.
Have a great day.
That right there was an interview I recorded back before the hurricane decided to blow through. Was going to air it last Monday, but due to all the flooding and such, I was unable to make it in here at WODU. I am TJ the DJ. It has been fun bringing this episode of Topical Applications, heard Mondays from 10:30 until 11:30 right here on WODU, the heartbeat of Old Dominion University. I will be right back here with you on Friday at 2:30 with Bullying the Jukebox, bringing you some great punk rock, ska, roots, reggae. Who knows what else will pop up in that playlist. Tune in then. Tune in next Monday, 10:30, for more Topical Applications right here on WODU, the heartbeat of Old Dominion.